how your internet service provider is doing. Well, joining me in the studio today is Mr. Rick St. Germain. Can I say Dr. Rick St. Germain? No, it's not official. Just your wife is a doctor. You're a doctor too. Oh, okay. Oh, very good. I'll talk to you about my ailments. No, it's not that kind of doctorate. But Rick, you have been kind of known as the LCO historian here at Le Coudray, and I have sat in a couple of your presentations and am amazed the depth of your knowledge and expertise. The visual presentation you give in your PowerPoints with photographs and maps is just amazing. And you're going to be talking about um, the tribal history of the Coudray. So I'll let you talk because you're better at telling me what this whole series is going to be about.
Mark, we decided to do a lecture series at Kinnaman School. And I'm going to start it out. I thought it would be great to give some deep background into the original founding of the Coudray and also even prior to the founding of the Coudray in roughly 1745, perhaps going back almost a century earlier.
Yeah.
With refugees who were fleeing from the Iroquois back east in the region of Lake Erie. Those were Algonquian relatives who fled down in the southern part of Lake Michigan and also through the northern part of Lake Michigan and ended up in what is now Wisconsin. And one of the places they stopped was the Coudray. So there's a lot of history that I'm going to combine both the academic research, that the publishings that was done back in the early 1800s, and also even earlier than that with some of the French explorers. We're digging into some of that research about the region and also some oral history. So we're going to combine some elements of evidence to show what was going on here in northern Wisconsin several hundred years ago.
Yeah. Where did you find a lot of this information? I mean, I'm assuming there had to be years of research and talking to individuals and elders here in the community, but then there has to be some sort of written history. Where did you find all this stuff?
Well, first, let me say that back before electricity at Le Coudray, there were a lot of historians at LCO.
Yeah.
It was a gold mine of people who were carrying down generations of stories from their grandparents. And it was rich. It was really vitally rich. And not only that, was colorful. And that drew the interest of a lot of younger kids. And I say before electricity, I'm saying roughly around 1960, I think, was when Jump River came in and established some lines to Indians.
Yeah.
And I think up in the boulevard there was electricity, and I believe non-Indian people were getting served, and in other places too.
Sure.
Usually right around where you got to the border, that's where the electrical power lines are. But after that, I noticed that things changed around here. More families got preoccupied with television after electricity, and I think a lot of that history sharing stopped. I regret, saying that families that weren't as cohesive after electricity that you will find prior to. Families really got together and did a lot of things together.
Right.
So I found that I started in the 60s going around talking to folks in the late 60s and getting information from them. And I was just amazed. I could cross-reference stories from over in the Boulevard area to people who live in New Post. I mean, how is that possible? Well, I think what that says is the evidence describes a people who really did share stories across the broad span of the reservation and beyond.
Yeah. It's interesting that, like you mentioned, you had dates back to the 1600s when the Odawa occupied this area of LCO. Talk a little bit about that.
You know, my great aunt described these French explorers, Radisson and Grossier, and somehow those stories filtered down into the 1950s. Believe it or not, think about it. It's 300 years after Radisson and Grossier were here in 1659.
Sure.
And they almost died. And I was just amazed that these elderly ladies around here could describe the hardship that they went through with a horrible winter. There was deep snow and it paralyzed the whole community here. Think about this. This is 1659. They're describing these French explorers stripping bark off of the saplings that were used on the wigwams. You know, they were actually using their knives to cut the bark off because you couldn't get out of your wigwam, and the snow was too deep.
Sure.
And it was just, I'd been hunting when the snow was up to my knees, and I was almost exhausted when I was younger.
Yeah.
And without snowshoes. But here, the snow was probably up to a man's hip, and they just couldn't move. They couldn't get out of their wigwams. They couldn't get wood for fire. They were desperate.
Wow.
And so they were, we had people here describing some of the things they were doing, like cooking rabbit's ears, for example, and things like that really described the hardship. And what it did was it created a situation where the Odawa fled. They just finally had enough of LCO and they went north. There's a lot of revelations I think that I'm going to be able to share with people. I think genetically I'm going to talk about what the genetics of modern day Ojibwe are. And again, I've got some evidence. And what I'm going to do is tell them what other kinds of tribes they have blood in their veins.
Yeah,
and,
right.
And so I think this is going to be exciting opportunity for tribal members here to hear some of these accounts, both from the research. I've got stories from Schoolcraft, for example, who was here in 1831. And of course, what he was doing a survey of the resources of the region that could be used in treaty making with the United States government. And so in a way, he was a spy who was coming in, and he was describing the headmen who were here at LCO and describing the village and the livelihood that was underway here.
Yeah. So I'm talking with Rick St. Germain about a lecture series or a conversation series, as he's put it, starting this August 9th. It's a Wednesday evening from 6 p.m. until about 7:15 or thereafter. Who knows how long the discussions will go. Yes.
We may have some who will want to stick around and talk more question and answer. And also, we have people on this reservation who could strengthen some of the things that I'm saying.
Right.
I mean, they've also have information. So I'd like to see a give and take. I'd like to see people willing to talk about stories coming down from their heritage.
And you have listed here on this promotional paper just 13 different talks that you will be giving, and
I probably have 30.
Probably more, yeah. Well,
I probably have 30 stories.
I got the Reader's Digest version of it. Have there. But again, this is all starting August 9th from at 6 o'clock on a Wednesday, and then every other Wednesday after that. Now, one of the things that piped to my interest here is the Lacoudere in the 1700s. Was that the starting of the Lacoudere tribe or the settlement of Lacoudere?
You know what was going on in northern Wisconsin back in the early 1700s were tribal people who lived up off of the Lake Superior.
Okay.
And those were a combination of some refugees from that Lake Erie region that I described earlier, and also the Ojibwe, who were migrating here from back east.
Mm-hmm.
And they were settling in and around on both sides of Lake Superior. And there are literally hundreds of streams and rivers that are draining down into Lake Superior.
Yeah.
You know, as an exercise, about a week and a half ago, I counted over 30 streams between Spirit Island and in Superior, Wisconsin, over to Red Cliff. I counted 30 streams emptying into Lake Superior, and I thought well, maybe there might be 50 all the way around the lake. Well, in that little strip of land, there were 30. Now, what was going on, Mark, was people really weren't living at Madeline Island like, we hear that myth that Madeline Island was this place with 2,000 Ojibwe. Yeah. It was too small. Back in the late 1600s, it just couldn't sustain life in a small area like that. The Ojibwe spread out. They were living along the lake, and the reason they weren't going into the interior down into Wisconsin was covered with trees that had a diameter the size of this studio here. They were virgin pine, mostly white pine, other kinds of species too, but these trees were huge.
Yeah.
And
you're talking 15 feet diameter.
Well, the studio is about that. And actually, Mark, when I lived in Massachusetts for a couple of years, about 23 years ago, I saw some of those trees of all places in Massachusetts, and they were about as big as this studio.
Wow.
And those trees were 400 years old. But we had trees like that all over Wisconsin. Northern Wisconsin was just filled with huge pine trees.
Sure.
And the trouble with that, Mark, is that they also they're coniferous, and they have pine needles, and those pine needles blanketed everything and just kept out the sun. If you've ever lived under a white pine, I did.
Yeah.
I lived underneath a huge stand of big white pines over in Little Round Lake, and nothing grew underneath it.
Sure.
But when you walked underneath those pine trees, there was like a cushion of pine needles. You just felt like you were on a cloud, walking with your feet sinking down into those thick pine needles. But the trouble with that, of course, is you don't have underbrows, and white-tailed deer need underbrows, and Ojibwe needed white-tailed deer more than they needed beaver or anything else.
Sure.
And it was for clothing and all other kinds of things. So Indians didn't come down here. There were just too many big trees, and it didn't allow the deciduous growth that the white-tailed deer needed. So these are some of the things I'm going to talk about as we talk about the early years of the region, Sawyer County and beyond, because once LCO got settled here in the early 1700s by the Ojibwe spread out. Ojibwe back then, woodland tribes needed a broad expanse of area to sustain their living.
Sure.
And they also had to find the deciduous. And by the way, there were pockets of deciduous growth, and I can talk about that when I get into my lecture series. There's a lot of things we need to talk about. We need to not only just talk about the history, but we also need to include the climate and the geography of the region.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a million lakes up here too, by the way. And so those are some of the things that we're going to be sharing.
I think it'll be interesting to hear how the Ojibwe survived again. So you talked about winters and how terrible they could be, but some of them did pretty well, obviously, because we're still here. They're still modern and modern things now. But I think about you talk about the snowstorms of those early years and how they couldn't get out. Well, it's hard for us to fathom that today because we got plows that go by and dig out our streets, and we got snow blowers that are throwing snow 20 feet in the air. And they didn't even have, they probably made some shovels of some sort or something to move snow except by hand. Who maybe they used their snowshoes as a shovel. I don't know.
They did.
Yeah. But to think about the not so much the inconvenience, but the desperation of surviving a winter.
Ojibwe had to survive in all of these extreme weather conditions. I imagine there was even a couple tornadoes up in this area back then, and so they had to be able to withstand the storms and the horrific, southern or the summer storms, as well as the brutal winters. And you just mentioned snowshoes and other inventions that the Ojibwe utilized. We had the birch bark canoe, and our enemies, the Dakota, didn't, and they had dugout canoes, and so they were somewhat cumbersome. Ours were more revolutionary and in swift movement.
Yeah.
But these were some of the inventions that a people had to create because they had to survive. And we're going to be talking about survival. We're going to be talking about what it took for a large complex of Ojibwe people to survive in a region. They had to spread out. And so what I describe as the outlier communities, which created other communities like St. Croix, and you go up to Gordon, Wisconsin today, and they have their own history up in Gordon, Wisconsin, on the way to Superior. By the way, I guess I'm going to be talking up there too in a series. But I just came from Madeline Island. They had a first annual CAPSR commemoration thing, and I gave the keynote up there on the issues around Madeline Island. But I'm going to help the museum, the LCO Museum, which has a treasure of artifacts and historical records, and we have just a wealth of resources over at the Kinnaman Museum, or I should say the LCO Museum at Kinnaman. And that's where we're going to do this lecture series.
Yeah.
And I think the museum is going to get much more active now, and we've got a capital construction plan, and we're going to build an annex onto the existing Kinnaman School facility. Okay. And that annex in the back there, back in the woods a ways, is going to serve as an educational resource for the community here. So that's why we're kind of getting more active now over there at the museum.
Yeah, I know. I've been to that museum side of it. Everybody goes to the left side, which is more of the meeting space and classroom space, and there's some history there. But boy, on the right side, where the actual museum and all the artifacts that are there, it's just amazing of what's there. And Faith Smith has done a great job curating everything there and keeping things well. I mean, just to look at some of the detail of the fabrics that are there, some of the other naturally, I don't know how to describe it. I just know that preserving history is a big deal, and museums have to have certain things in place for infrastructure to make sure these things last for the next generation. So it's really cool to see not just the photographs but actual items that were handmade, created, passed along through the centuries, and what's there. It's just amazing.
Faith Smith has done a wonderful job of collecting uh, lots of documents.
Yeah.
And some of these documents need to be transcribed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're doing. We're putting it into a written form now so that we can use that as a resource for the tribe. And we've got stories and testimony from people over 100 years ago who were describing conditions and needs at LCO. And also about the Winter Dam and just a host of things like that. And we've got these, just stacks of photos that we're going to be able to
scan those and
and make them available. So I think the museum needs to expand. We also have the possibility of repatriating a lot of items from our tribe that are housed in museums from the Atlantic coast all the way over to the Pacific.
Yeah.
I was in the Lowy Museum at Berkeley when I worked there, and the curator took me down into the archives, which is 4 stories of space down under the museum. It's just huge, and he took me right to Le Coudray, and we had to go down and across and around, and we got to the trays, and I opened them up, and here we have artifacts from people apparently in the 19th century who were, I don't know where they got them. Were they grave digging, or what were they doing? How did they get these artifacts? But these artifacts belong at LCO. We need a facility here, so that's what Faith is working on, and we've got a plan, and we're gonna get the community involved in it. We need to protect our heritage. We need to really get in there and have a place for exhibits. And I was just down at the Meskwaki Museum down in Iowa. Our relatives, the Fox Indians down there, they've got this fabulous museum, and it's not that large, but yet as I was going in and around the walkway of the museum, there they had regalia from way back in the 1800s, and then they had modern regalia that some of their tribal women had put together, and it was modern, but yet it resembled those things that were used 150 years ago. So it was just gorgeous. And they had a migration map, which was a mural on the wall, and I followed their movement from the Atlantic Ocean. The Fox Indians and the Ojibwe were once the same tribe. And we kind of separated when we got to the region around Fort Detroit. And that's where problems started. And we became, believe it or not, the enemies. And so I'm going to be talking about the wars with the Fox, which took place right here near LCO, and some of the battles that occurred just north of us here. And so while I was down there with my friends who were giving me a tour of this museum, it was embarrassing because it showed all these battles at Detroit with the Ojibwe, and then the battles went north, and they swung around through the Upper Peninsula, and every once in a while you would see a battle, and then there would be, a line that goes out with a description of the battle, and it got to LCO, and it was describing battles that took place between the Ojibwe and Meskwaki. And here I was, an Ojibwe, standing there, with my Meskwaki friends, and we're looking at battles at LCO.
Wow.
I was mortified. I felt bad. I've always felt bad. Why were we fighting with the fox? We spoke the same language. While we were down there, they were speaking, and they were speaking practically Ojibwe.
Yeah.
So I just think that some of the things that happened back in the 1700s we need to talk about, and that's one of the things I'm going to cover. The war with the Fox Indians from the early 1700s.
Okay. And again, this is happening or starting August 9th. It's a Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock at the Kinnamon School. And as you enter the building, just go up the stairs and there'll be the room to the left where you'll be giving your presentations. And like I said, this is just the beginning of some great presentations that you do. I know you bring in PowerPoint slides with a lot of photographs or drawings that are done, maps, and it's a very visual presentation. And I appreciate that. It's not just oratory presentation. There's visuals along with that. And then you mentioned that if someone raises their hand in the middle of this and they say, I have a question or I'd like to add something to that story, you're going to stop the presentation and say, hey, let's talk.
Yeah, I think that's rich when you have people willing to offer something from their genealogy. They also have history, and I think this can be a real give and take opportunity for people to share some of the things they have too.
Yeah.
I don't, whenever I teach, I think it's a two-way activity that should take place between an audience and the presenters.
Yeah.
So I really want to encourage people to talk and share some things they have too.
Yeah.
And this is open to everyone, by the way, Mark. I certainly hope our tribal members will participate in this, but it is open to the wide community throughout Sawyer County.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope we get a good turnout. There's no charge to this. We're going to encourage people to donate $1, and that's going to be for the coffee and the rolls, just to help out with that. That would be great if we could get just simply a small donation, maybe $1.
Yeah.
Or if they have 53 cents in their pocket, just put it in the basket.
Yeah. It all helps out. Well, Rick, this is going to be exciting. I know I have asked you, and I even have somebody online asking if this is going to be streamed or broadcast. And at this point, you're not so willing to do that. And I'm assuming because of this discussion element, it's not really a final presentation. You're actually still working on information, and when you present and you get this feedback from the audience, it might add some content, it might change some content. So it's not really in a final presentation point, even though it's very rich and there is a lot of information in here. It's not finished yet.
No, and we're not going to streamline it, but at some point, maybe I will.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple of years down the road. I'm working on a book too, Mark, about the history of LCO, and I'm still in progress doing the chapters on that. I have some chapters done, and I don't know how many chapters there's going to be, maybe 20 or 25. It's going to be a big book.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of information about LCO. And I'm going to be talking about people that are described as chiefs. We have, I think, Nanangabi was probably our greatest chief, and also Kawanse and Mosojid, and we had Blue Sky and just a host of others who became chiefs when they signed the treaty.
Yeah.
But before the treaties, they were headmen, and they were headmen of clans. And so we'll talk about that as well. We're going to talk about how treaties transform the landscape, and also I'm going to get into the treaties pretty heavily. I used to work with Ron Satz down in Eau Claire, and he and I traveled around the state and did a lot of lectures, and we were doing things on the treaties of the early 19th century and how that changed America. and actually won the war, World War II, for the American side. The Ojibways made that contribution.
Yeah, right. Wow. Very cool. Well, we have just about 30 seconds left, so we'll give that time to make sure people know. Kinnamon School is located at the crossing of County Road E and K. And if you're happening to coming from the Hayward area on Highway B, just get to the casino, turn right, and head south on K. And then when E comes up and it does split, the school sits right there at the split, and they'll be available there the 9th of August on a Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Yay, we just made it.
Good. Good.